Practice Listening Test, Paper 1. This is a practice listening test that resembles the IELTS listening test. It is a test to see how well you understand spoken English. You will hear several different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. You will hear each recording once only. The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the real IELTS test, you will have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1. Listening Section 1. In a moment, you are going to hear a conversation between Claudia and Toshio, who are 2 overseas students in Australia. They are discussing plans to take a holiday after their studies finish. Before you listen, look at questions 1 to 7. Note the examples that have been done for you. As you listen to the first part of the conversation, answer questions 1 to 7.
Well, Claudia, our first semester at university is almost over. I can't wait for the holidays.
Me too, Toshio. Why don't we go away somewhere far away and forget about lectures and essays and all that hard work?
Sounds good to me. Now, how long will we have before we have to be back here on campus for the next semester?
We've got about 6 weeks, I think.
How about if we go to the coast? It would be great to do some swimming and surfing.
The coast would be good. But let's look at our other options. There's the mountains. They're nice and cool at this time of year. And we can do some bushwalking. There's also the desert, which I really enjoyed last year.
What about going to Sydney? I've never been there, and they say it's a great city to visit. Lots of things to do there, I've heard.
I agree. Sydney would be good. But there are too many tourists there at this time of year. And I'd rather get away from buildings and cars. There are enough of those around here. I vote for the mountains.
All right then, let's do that. Now we have to decide where we're going to stay and how we're going to get there. Any suggestions?
Well, for places to stay, there are the usual places, motels, hotels, youth hostels. We could go camping too.
I'm afraid I'm not a very good camper, Claudia. I tend to feel a bit frightened sleeping outdoors. And the hassle of building fires and all the insects and...
All right. We'll forget about camping. Although I must admit, it would have been my first choice. So, what should we do?
Well, since neither of us has a lot of money, I don't think a hotel or motel would be possible. How about a youth hostel?
I'd rather not go to a youth hostel, Toshio. They're certainly cheap, but you never get to be alone in those places. There's always a stranger in the next bed, and I hate sharing kitchens with people I don't know. No, I think we should find a small holiday house to rent, and if we get a few more friends to join us, it'll be really cheap.
I think your idea's spot on. But who should we ask along? How about Peter? Do you think he'd want to join us?
I was just talking to him this morning, and he said he was flying home to Hong Kong for a visit.
Oh, well, what about Maria and her boyfriend Georg? Oh, and David Wong might be interested. And his brother Walter is studying here too. We can ask him.
Hang on, not so fast, please. I'm writing a list of people to ring. Let me think. We could ask Jennifer too. I don't think she has any plans. And Michael Sullivan, perhaps too. I think I'll just ring them all now.
After ringing their friends, Claudia returns to speak to Toshio.
Well, I've talked to everyone we thought of. A few of them are quite keen, actually.
Tell me, what did they say?
Well, Jennifer can't make it. She's already booked a flight to Queensland. She says she's going to meet her boyfriend up there. I also talked to David Wong. He says he'll come. He says he's really looking forward to getting off campus too.
What about his brother, Walter?
His brother's going overseas. In fact, he's not even coming back next term. It seems he's transferred to a university in Canada. I then called Maria's house. Her boyfriend Georg answered. I told him our plans and he asked Maria. They both want to join us.
Good. They'll be fun to be with. Now, what about Michael Sullivan? Did you talk to him?
Yes, but he said he'd rather spend his holiday at home. He's not interested in going anywhere. Can you imagine?
Later, Toshio and Claudia are talking while Toshio fills out a holiday house rental form. Now look at questions 8 to 11. As the conversation continues, answer questions 8 to 11.
The form asks for home addresses. I've put mine, 52 Miller Street. But let me see if I've got yours right. It's 614 Valentine Street, isn't it?
You've got the street number right, but not the street name. It's 614 Ballantyne Street. That's Ballantyne.
Okay. We're paying by credit card. Is that all right?
That's fine.
Have you got a Visa card or a MasterCard? And I need to know the number, of course.
Sure, it's 77432129. But it's not a Visa or MasterCard. It's an American Express card.
So let me just repeat that. It's 77432129. American Express, right?
That's right.
One more thing we have to write down. That's the deposit we're paying to reserve the holiday house. It says it should be at least 10% of the rental cost.
Let's just figure that out now. We're paying $350 a week, right?
Right. And we're planning to stay there for 5 weeks. So the deposit's, shall we say $225?
No, that can't be right. I'd say it's less than that. In fact, about $50 less than that. It should be $175.
I guess you're right. Okay, that's what I'll put down.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Listening section 2. In a moment, you are going to hear an orientation talk given to new overseas students at Maslow University. The talk is being given by Ms. Jennifer Davis. Before you listen, look at questions 12 to 14. As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 12 to 14.
Hello, my name's Jennifer Davis. I'm the Student Affairs Officer here at Maslow University, and I'd first of all like to welcome you all to this orientation talk. I'll be talking to you about the campus and a little of its history, and then I'll be introducing you to some of the facilities available to all Maslow University students, and in particular, overseas students. First, let me just point out to you 2 people who you will definitely need to know. They are Bruce Chandler, who is the coordinator of the Overseas Student Office. Actually, you can see Bruce in that group of people over there. Bruce is the short man with the beard and glasses. Hi, Bruce. Bruce will be speaking to you later. The other person you'll be meeting is Donna Wilcox. Now, Donna's in charge of the Student Union Activities Office. In fact, Donna's just over there too. She's the one with the white top and dark skirt. Hi there, Donna. She'll be speaking to you today later too. Now, I want to congratulate you all for getting to this talk on time. I say this because I know the campus can be a bit confusing for people when they first get here. In fact, I'd just like to spend a few minutes pointing out some of the landmarks that can be seen from here. Let's see. If you look just behind me, you'll see a large 4-storey brick building. That's the Borland Library, named after Harold Borland, who was the first Chancellor of Maslow University. Just ahead of me are 2 buildings that look like identical twins. In fact, they serve very different purposes. One of them is the University Language Centre. That's the one on my right. The other one, the one on my left, is the Aeronautics Building. Now, to the east of us, you'll see no building at all, just trees and flowers and a huge grassy area. That's the Maslow Gardens, which were part of the original design of the campus. And finally, to the west of where I'm standing, we can see the largest building on campus, 17 stories of steel and glass construction. I'll give you one guess what that is. That's right, it's the University Administration Building.
Now look at questions 15 to 21. As the talk continues, answer questions 15 to 21.
Obviously, the buildings we can see from here aren't the only ones on campus. In fact, there are a total of 70 buildings of various sizes and purposes scattered over some 13 hectares of land. Later, I'll be giving out maps to you and will also be giving you a tour after lunch. Next, let me give you a little history about Maslow University. The university was not originally a university at all. John Herbert Maslow came to this country from Scotland in 1822 at the age of 33. He had trained and worked as a maths teacher before immigrating, and when he got here, he found that there were lots of people wanting education, but not nearly enough people to teach them. So he set up a teachers' college on this very site in 1825. The students of the college spent an average of 2 years here before they went out to find work in primary schools and high schools being set up around the state. Around 3,200 students graduated from Maslow Teachers College in its first 10 years of operation. And I should mention that though John Maslow set up the college, it was always strictly a public institution, always the property of the state government. Now, even though John Maslow died in 1848, the Teachers College continued to run in much the same way until 1868. Around that time, the state government had plans to establish 2 new universities. In 1866, Riversdale University was established on a site about 11 kilometres northwest of the city centre. The government wanted the second university to be a bit closer to town, so they chose to convert Maslow Teachers College into Maslow University. That happened 2 years after they opened Riversdale University. As you know, Maslow is southeast of the city centre, but it's only 1.5 kilometres away. You may be interested to know that there's always been an intense rivalry between Maslow University and Riversdale University. They're always trying to outdo each other academically and also, importantly, in sport. Now, with sport, it all depends on what game we're talking about. I don't think anyone in either university would argue that Maslow has the better basketball team and the better soccer team. In fact, Maslow has beaten Riversdale in both sports for about 10 years running. But Riversdale University has its strengths too. Riversdale's football team has always defeated Maslow's, and in women's swimming too. Though not in men's swimming. Riversdale tends to come out on top. When it comes to baseball, well, both universities have a poor record, and the same goes for track and field. Incidentally, the sports teams here at Maslow are always looking for new members, in particular those with a strong background in sport. Now, let's move on to the facilities in the Student Union.
That is the end of Section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Listening Section 3. In a moment, you are going to hear a conversation between Teresa and Bob, two economics students. They are having a cup of coffee between lectures. Before you listen, look at questions 22 to 33. Note the examples that have been done for you. As you listen to the conversation, answer questions 22 to 33.
This is yummy coffee, Bob. How's yours?
It's excellent. You know, Teresa, I just read an article about coffee last night. It was in that journal that Professor Clark recommended to us.
Which one was that? Oh, I think I know. Food Economics Review. Isn't that it?
That's the one. Anyway, in the article there were all kinds of interesting things about coffee that I'd never known before.
Yeah? Like what?
Well, did you know that over 30 million people earn their living from some aspect of coffee farming?
That's a lot of people. Coffee obviously has a lot of importance economically.
Absolutely. In fact, it's the second most valuable commodity in the world after oil.
Wow, well if it's that big, it's probably produced and controlled by a few large companies, just like with oil.
Well, this article said otherwise. It said that most coffee is grown by farmers with only 4 or 5 hectares of land, and coffee's usually all they produce.
So who produces the most coffee? I mean, which country?
It depends on what type of coffee bean you're talking about.
Of course. Each country's coffee has a different flavour. My favourite's Jamaican.
What you're talking about isn't type, it's just regional variation. What I'm talking about is the coffee bean itself. One common type of coffee bean is called Robusta. It's grown at altitudes of below 600 metres.
Is that what we're drinking now?
Probably not. The coffee we're drinking is premium quality. Robusta is usually used to make instant coffee.
Yuck.
Anyway, the premium coffee, like the stuff we're drinking now, is from a type of bean called Arabica. They grow it higher up, at between 600 and 2,000 metres.
So those are the two types of coffee, are they?
Actually, there's one more, called Liberica. It's grown below 1,200 metres, but apparently it's not produced in very large quantities. It's used in blended coffees.
Listen, Bob, I'm still waiting for an answer to my question. Who grows the most coffee?
Now that I've explained the types, Teresa, I can tell you. For the Arabica type, it's Brazil, followed by Colombia.
So Latin America's the biggest producer?
Only for Arabica coffee. But it's also grown in large quantities in Africa too. In fact, the number 3 Arabica producer is Kenya.
What about the other type, Robusta?
The biggest producer of Robusta is Uganda, but the second largest is in Asia. That's Indonesia. In fact, Indonesia is the 4th largest producer of coffee in general in the world.
So tell me, Bob, did the article talk about how people like their coffee?
Yes, it did. In terms of preferred styles of coffee in different countries. The article divided these styles into instant coffee, espresso coffee and brewed coffee. It seems European countries tend to drink more brewed coffee. Countries like Sweden and Norway, for example. It's the same for the Germans. But strangely enough, in the UK, instant coffee is king. Perhaps they like the convenience of instant.
What about the Italians? I suppose espresso would be what they prefer.
That's right. And while espresso is popular across the border in France too, it's still outsold by brewed. In the US, people drink more cups of instant than anything else. But interestingly enough, in Japan, brewed coffee is the number 1.
What about the producing countries?
Well, you're never going to believe this, Teresa, but Brazilians, for example, who grow all those beautiful premium beans, actually prefer instant. It's even more expensive than brewed.
Is there any sort of large world body that watches over all the buying and selling of coffee, like they've got for oil?
There is. It's called the International Coffee Organization, the ICO. It was actually set up by the United Nations in 1963 to try to stabilise the world coffee market. There's something like over 100 countries that belong to it, both producing countries and consuming countries.
So how does it work?
It's pretty complex from what I could gather from the article, but basically, the ICO reckons that by controlling the amount of coffee that's available on the world market, they can keep prices from going too low or too high.
That sounds reasonable. Does it work?
Usually, but sometimes it doesn't. Back in 1975, Brazil produced almost no coffee at all because the coffee plants were killed before harvest by freezing weather.
Which meant that there was a demand but not much supply.
Exactly. Especially with Brazil being such a large producer. Anyway, as you'd expect, prices shot through the roof. The ICO couldn't do anything to help.
So people paid a premium for coffee then?
Well, no, actually. The prices went so high for half a year or so that millions of people no longer bought coffee. They couldn't afford to. So you know what happened next?
What? No, let me guess. If nobody's buying coffee, the price had to come down. Am I right?
Exactly right. The whole market collapsed, as a matter of fact, and coffee became cheaper than it had been for the previous 25 years. Unbelievable, but true.
Shall we order another cup?
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers. Listening section 4. In a moment, you are going to hear a talk given by Catherine Blakely, who is a lecturer in management studies. She will be discussing aspects of business meetings. Before you listen, look at questions 34 to 41. Note the example that has been done for you. As you listen to the talk, answer questions 34 to 41.
Hello everyone, my name's Catherine Blakely. I'm Associate Professor of Management Studies here on campus. Today is the second in our series of talks on aspects of holding business meetings. Last week we talked about the most effective ways of leading meetings and the advantages and disadvantages of different leadership styles. Today, in this second talk of the series, I'd like to discuss the role of the facilitator in a meeting. For those of you who aren't aware, businesses and organisations in the past 20 years or so have turned to this idea of a facilitator. A facilitator is a person in the organisation who's chosen to ensure that meetings are carried out efficiently. The facilitator works together with a meeting leader, but their roles are quite different. The meeting leader concerns himself or herself with the content of the meeting. By content, I mean, of course, what the meeting's for. The facilitator, on the other hand, is more concerned with the process of the meeting. This notion of process includes the rules for the meeting and making sure everyone has a chance to participate. Okay, I next want to outline what are commonly known as the 5 global responsibilities of a facilitator. This is to give you a better idea of just what a facilitator does and why they're so important to meetings. One global responsibility is labelled blueprinting. Blueprinting a meeting involves creating an agenda and clarifying rules for the meeting. Much of this work is done together with a meeting leader. Blueprinting also means learning about each of the participants and what their goals and interests are with regard to the topic of the meeting. It also involves printing and photocopying documents for the meeting and assembling equipment such as visual aids. A second global responsibility is what we call pro-integration. Pro-integration happens during the actual meeting. For this, the facilitator must listen carefully to what the participants are saying, then clarify any unfamiliar terms or phrases spoken by the participants. He or she then summarises what was said to ensure everybody at the meeting both fully understands and is fully understood. Global responsibility number 3 is what I term focusing. This is basically seeing that everyone keeps to the task at hand, not wandering off onto other topics. It's all too easy for discussion in a meeting to get off track. Here, the facilitator supervises the discussion, making sure all comments are relevant to the task. Focusing also involves knowing in which direction the meeting should be going and making sure it goes there. We can compare the facilitator's role here to that of a bus driver steering the group where they need to go. This brings us to prompting, which is our 4th global responsibility. Not everyone at a meeting may feel confident enough to talk, and we must remember that just because they're quiet, it doesn't mean that they've got nothing to contribute. So a facilitator might prompt people, that is, ask people questions or use other activities to get members involved. The task of prompting also means making sure that participants who tend to dominate allow the quieter members a chance to speak. After all, there's nothing more boring than having 1 or 2 people dominate a meeting. When participants get into disputes or arguments with each other, then it's time for the facilitator to take on the role of friction manager. This is the 5th global responsibility of the facilitator and the last on our list. Friction management means handling conflicts in a positive and constructive manner. During meetings, when members may have very different points of view, emotions can run high and people may begin to act negatively toward one another, getting into arguments or what have you. A good facilitator knows that this kind of negative behaviour serves no purpose at business meetings. Its effects are not constructive. So he or she then has to use his or her skills to return the group to a peaceful atmosphere and maintain that atmosphere. There are various skills involved in friction management, which I won't go into here, but basically, the notion of getting the group to focus on what they agree on rather than what they disagree on is vital.
That is the end of Section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of listening test 1. At the end of the real test, you will have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to a listening answer sheet.